So guys, with so much going on in Texas, I'm really thrilled to have Governor Greg Abbott join me on the podcast. Governor Abbott, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to have you, and at such a crazy and busy time. Let me start by asking you about these runaway Texas Democrats who boarded private planes and skipped town. Now, what is going to happen next? Because it looks to me like they're going to try to wait out this legislative session, probably try to return after it's over. What is your plan for thwarting their runaway plan?
Sure. Well, I'll answer your question. But first, Dinesh, I think we need to all admit that the fact that Texans would run away from a fight would be kind of the most un-Texan thing to do. Since the very beginnings, Texans have always stood their ground and they fought for the principles that they believed in. But this is a case where Democrats, they're not standing here in Austin, Texas, engaging in debate for which they were elected to do, and voting on issues and trying to convince others to make modifications to laws and fighting for where they stand. And instead, they've cut and run. They're not doing the job. They have abandoned their job. And as a result, I think that their constituents are going to be very unhappy because their constituents, they have to go to work every single day. And if their constituents were to leave their job, got unhappy and try to make a statement, whatever the case may be, their constituents would not be getting a paycheck. And yet these legislators who are up there on some taxpayer junket in Washington, D.C., they are getting paid. But to answer your question, the power that the governor has in Texas, for your viewers who may not know, we have a legislative session every other year that lasts 140 days. It ends at the end of May. And because of the long period of time between sessions, the governor has the capability of calling a special session anytime the governor chooses that lasts exactly 30 days. We're in a special session right now that will last 30 days, that will end on its schedule in early August. And I will be able to call session after session after session after session. So here's the point, and that is this is a futile exercise on the part of the Democrats who have left the state because this issue is going to be raised in a session when they return to Texas, whenever that may be. And they're going to have to vote on this at that particular time. And so this is all gimmickry right now. But also, the way things happen is that there's what's called a call on the House. What that means is the House of Representatives has issued a call that empowers a sergeant of arms to work with the Texas Department of Public Safety to arrest and bring to the Capitol the members who have absconded off to Washington, D.C. The only challenge about that right now is that the jurisdiction for the reach of the Texas Department of Public Safety ends at our borders, which is why the Democrats had to flee outside of the state, knowing that they had to leave the state to escape the jurisdiction of the Texas Department of Public Safety. When they return to the state of Texas, if they return to the state of Texas, they will be brought to the Capitol, and the House of Representatives has the power to keep them locked into the House chamber until they step up and cast votes on the issues that are on the special session agenda.
Now, Governor Abbott, you mentioned earlier that this is a kind of a non-Texan behavior on the part of the Democrats, appealing, you may say, to their sense of honor. But let me pursue that angle for a moment, because, in the January 6th protest, we heard that those people were doing something terrible because they were disrupting an official proceeding. In other words, they were not letting the democratic process take its course, that they were, I guess, for a few hours delaying that process. And this was presented as sedition, anti-democratic behavior of the highest order. Now, I realize that the Texas Democrats didn't storm the Capitol. They chose a different road, which is to skip town. But isn't the effect kind of the same? Namely, here you've got Texas, you've got a democratically elected group of representatives and senators. They're engaged in a legislative session called constitutionally by the governor, and the Democrats are disrupting that session and behaving in an undemocratic way. Didn't Biden himself in his speech talk about the fact that, listen, the losing side in an election needs to accept the result. They've got to acquiesce in the will of the majority. So although the media is portraying some of the Texas Democrats as heroes, aren't they in fact acting in an anti-democratic fashion?
Right. As you know, the mainstream media perpetuates exactly what President Biden said, and that is that the losing party needs to acquiesce and just work as best they can within the paradigm that exists. And of course, the Democrats in Texas are not doing that. Dinesh, how I can give you a better example of what this relates to. One thing that the Democrats in Texas are trying to do in Washington, D.C., they went to Washington, D.C. to try to get the Democrats in Washington, D.C. to end the filibuster so that the Democrats would vote on the federal-based election law. So here's the hypocrisy. The Democrats in Texas are using a filibuster to go to Washington, D.C. to try to end a filibuster. That's the epitome of hypocrisy.
When we come back, I want to dive into the voter integrity law that seems to be the motivation for the Texas Democrats to do their little runaway act. We'll be right back.